friends, I'm Kyla and welcome back to the Infinite Library. So today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for February and I'm going to keep it quite breezy and quite quick. I think there's a couple of books here that I read for a specific vlog, so I'm not really going to go into much detail about those books in particular. But I did manage to get through 14 books in February. I'm quite impressed with that, to be honest. I did manage to get through 14 books in February, which is definitely a high increase from January, but I also read some manga, so that does equate to that higher number in terms of books. If you ever think that I'm reading an awful lot of books in a month, it's usually because I've slipped in some manga and some graphic novels as well, and that has helped with bumping that number up essentially. So let's get the stats out of the way first before we talk about the books in question. So I read 14 books, as I said, which equated to a total of 4,003 pages. Format-wise, I read 9 of them physically and 5 of them digitally, so actually a lot more digital this time than I normally do. I was using my tablet a lot this month. Genre-wise, not surprising, given what my main kind of theme of the month was, 9 of the books I read were fantasy, although this does further split down into some kind of sub-genres. So of those 9 fantasy, 2 of them were middle grade, 3 were YA, and 4 were adult. I also read 5 manga, 3 of which were fantasy, and 2 of which were horror in genre. So basically, I read fantasy and horror this month, and that's kind of all I read. So source-wise, 8 of these 11 books were from my existing TBR, 2 of them I bought, 3 were rereads, and 1 was an ARC. Rating-wise, I had no 1 stars, thank God. I had 2 2 stars, 5 3 stars, 6 4 stars, and a single 5 star, making my average rating a 3.48, which is alright. I'd have liked to have read some better books this month, honestly. I'm a little disappointed at the amount of 3 stars I read, but it is what it is. Unfortunately, part of the perils of doing a themed kind of vlog is that you end up reading a lot of books that maybe you don't have high expectations for sometimes. So yeah, it is what it is. So I started off the month by reading Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is for Literary Diversions Fits Along. We are reading this one in January, February, and then for March and April we're picking up the sequel, which is Royal Assassin. So yeah, this was a reread for me. I read this a very long time ago. Honestly, I didn't remember too much about it. As I was reading it, it was kind of coming back to me. But I was surprised how much happens in this first book. There was a lot of things that happened that I was like, I'm sure that happened in the second book. But no, all the things that I seem to remember from this series seem to happen in the first book. So I'm about to start the second book now, and I have no clue what to expect. I have read it. The only book I haven't read in this, in the Farseer trilogy is the third book, which I stopped halfway through because I found it very depressing. So yeah, I was actually quite enjoyed this. I was a little bit trepidatious going into it because I was just kind of expecting it to be a very heavy fantasy, and I kind of forgot when I was reading it how readable Robin Hobb is. I will say though, I also forgot how depressing this series can be. The main character here, Fitz, he kind of goes through it, and he is a very, my friend describes him as a glass half empty kind of person, and that isn't always ideal to be in the mindset of, so I can see now why I ended up having to stop the third book. I'm hoping I will still really enjoy this series, but I think it did definitely temper my enjoyment a little bit. But the good thing is that we're going to be reading these books over 2 months, so if I need to, I can just read some of it and just take a break if I find it's getting a little too heavy emotionally. But overall, I did really enjoy this. I don't think I'd change my rating. I gave it a 4 originally, and I'm still going to give it a 4 now. And yeah, enjoying it. I think I'm looking forward to the second book. I'm just a little bit wary of it being a little bit too depressing, and I don't always gel with that, unfortunately. The second book is also a lot thicker than this one. This was quite a breezy read, honestly. It's not quite 500 pages, but it does read quite fast, so I did manage to finish this quite quickly. So that was the first book I read in the month. I'm gonna just get all the stuff for the vlog I'm doing out of the way. I'm not gonna give you a full review of all the books I read for that, because there's this many of them, and honestly, this is what the vlog is for. I will be going in full detail when I upload this vlog, which will hopefully be later this month. There's just a lot of editing to do, essentially. But I read all these books, plus 2 more, which I don't have physically, I only have them digitally, as part of this blog. And essentially, if you're not quite sure what it was I was doing, I was reading a whole bunch of fairy tale retellings. Ones that I hadn't read before on purpose, although there was a couple I was hoping I would get to round to rereading, but I didn't, unfortunately. So I will just fly through these in terms of ratings, like, really quickly. So I read, I'm going to go from worst book for me to best book for me. So I read Ramesa, A Fairy Tale by Radia Hafisa, which is a middle grade fantasy, which is like Indian interpretations of classic fairy tales. It has Rapunzel, obviously, we have Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella. I did really like the idea, but I think it was just too young for me, unfortunately, so I just didn't get out of it what I wish I wanted to have got out of it. I think it reads very young middle grade, so I gave this a high 2, I think. Cursed, which is, as you can see, I've tabbed it a lot. This is an anthology of short stories. Most are fantasy, but some of them do veer into horror. I did like some of the horror ones a lot, but it's a bunch of different authors who wrote stories in this. We've got Neil Gaiman, we've got Christina Henry, we've got Golden, and a bunch of other people. It's definitely given me a couple of authors I want to look out for in this, but if I'm being honest, a lot of these were just kind of in the mid-3 range. I didn't love a lot of these. There was a couple of standouts, but all in all, this wasn't a great anthology. So yeah, a 3 overall for Cursed. I then read The School of Good and Evil by Soman Chanani even, which is the start of a long series, which I will not be continuing. I did actually quite enjoy this book. I thought the characters were good, I thought the general premise was really good, and it made me laugh a lot. I just had some real issues with plot. I found it to be endlessly convoluted, and I think its messages got very mixed up throughout. It seemed to say things and then kind of backtrack on what it was saying. So whilst I did enjoy this book, it couldn't get more than a 3 for me again. So yeah, unfortunate, because I really wanted to love this one, but I did have a good time and it made me laugh a lot. So this was also a middle grade, by the way, so again, a little bit too young for me possibly, but definitely still readable, I think. Now we're getting into the books I enjoyed the most. Next we have The Forest Grimm by Catherine Purdle. This is the nice, this is a Luma crate? No, it's the FairyTale edition. So it's a very nice cover, and I enjoyed this book for what it was, but it just didn't quite hit me emotionally as much as I really wanted to. Had some great ideas, loved the ending, but overall, I don't think it's one that I'm ever going to reread, and I think there's going to be a second book in this series coming out, so it is a series, not just a standalone, but I don't think it's one I'll be carrying on, unfortunately. So yeah, overall, I did enjoy this though. Then I read a manga series. I completed a manga series, actually, and it is Dictatorial Grimoire, which is a 3-volume fantasy series about a boy called Otiga Grimm, who is the descendant of the Brothers Grimm family, essentially, and it turns out that all these people from the fairy tales are sort of like demons, and they're all trying to kill him. This person here called Cinderella is kind of helping him. It's a bit more convoluted than that. I think it was a little too short to be 3 volumes, unfortunately. I wish it kind of had stretched out to 4 or 5 volumes. I really like the series. I really enjoyed it. I never actually finished it, so finishing it was really nice. And yeah, the art is like gorgeous in this book. It's one of the things I like. I really like the characters. It's very funny. And yeah, overall, I was a little disappointed by the execution as it went further on in the series, but overall I did like this. I gave it a 4 overall. And finally, I read Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, which is a very short novella that kind of spins off Sleeping Beauty again. It's like, you know, a girl trapped in a tower who is sleeping, and there is a bunch of like a briar forest around her, and there is a girl called Toadling who is kind of trying to protect her, and then a knight type of person kind of comes along along and is trying to break the curse. And it was really, I really liked where the story went. I think it was the perfect length, honestly. I loved the writing style. I like T. Kingfisher, so this was probably going to be a win for me from the start. But yeah, really enjoyed it. This is probably the favourite book from the blog that I read. I gave this a 4 overall. So those are all the fairy tale books I read. We'll get on to the other books I read during the month next. I read 5 more books, I believe, this month that weren't part of a project, and one of them was what I picked out of my TBR jar. This is Dark Visions, which is like a bind up of 3 books in one, of the Dark Visions trilogy by L.J. Smith. She's kind of famous for writing The Vampire Diaries, which obviously got the TV show, and she's also wrote a couple of other series as well, such as The Night World, which I remember really loving when I was younger, and the Secret Circle series, which is one I want to revisit. But I've never heard of this one before until I just found it by chance a few years back and picked it up. Didn't know anything about it, had never read it, but it was in my, I've had it for so long, I need to read it, and it came out of the jar, and I was quite happy about it actually, because I knew this was going to be an easy read, and I had already decided that I wasn't going to try and read this whole thing, because the books themselves are quite short. They're maybe 250 pages, and if I didn't enjoy it, I wasn't going to carry it on. And I read the first book and it was not good. It was really bad. Very readable, I have to say. I read it during a time that I was quite stressed, and honestly it was the perfect thing for me to read at that time because it was extremely easy to read. It was very simple. Nothing was too, like, I had to concentrate too much. So it was a nice simple read. So I am glad I did read it, but honestly it felt like this was a book that I'd read before. And I'd never written it before. It just felt like it's the same story I've seen so many times before. It's the same characters we've seen before. There just wasn't anything really stand out about it. And I just didn't really connect with any of the characters. Like, they were just fine, essentially. For anyone that doesn't know, this is about a girl. By the way, that this is such bad, like, advertising on a whole for this book cover. It really annoys me because, one, this girl here doesn't look anything like the main girl, Caitlin, whatsoever. She looks like the main girl from Vampire Diaries, to the point that I'm like, did they just literally take a photo of the actress? But the main girl in the book has red hair and looks nothing like this. So it's always a bugbear for me when they put like people on the cover and they don't even look like the main character. I'm like, at least get that right if you're gonna put a person on the cover. Oh, also something I forgot to say that I'm just gonna mention now. Look at the original edition of this first book in the Dark Visions. It's so of its time. But the main girl looks like the main girl, even if the main guy looks like he's like 30 years old. But at least the old edition made the main girl look how she was supposed to. And also the tagline for it is, "Not all vampires are out for blood." This is not a book about vampires. This is a book about a group of teenagers who are psychics. One of the characters is described as being a psychic vampire, but this is not a book about vampires at all. So really not good in terms of how it's presenting itself. I think it just like knew that the author wrote Vampire Diaries, knew it was popular, and it tried to present itself as being like, here's the next Vampire Diaries. So yeah, that was really frustrating for me. But yeah, essentially it tells the story of this girl called Caitlin. She is able to sort of tell the future through prophetic drawings. Everyone is kind of afraid of her and calls her a witch. And then she gets pulled out of school and taken away to this like institute in California or something, along with 5 other teenagers from different places across America, and they've all got different psychic powers. And they're basically being tested at this institute to learn and control their powers, that kind of thing. There's a romance triangle, because of course there is. I did not care in the slightest which of the guys she ended up with. There are 2 other side characters who were ultimately not important. They were just there to occasionally be a plot device. And Caitlin herself was fine, but very frustrating at times. Yeah, this was just very meh, honestly. There's not really a whole lot I can say to recommend this. Like, if you like this author anyway, and you just want sort of like a light teen kind of story, then sure, this is good for you maybe. But honestly, it was just boring, was the main issue with this. It wasn't, I don't want to say it was awful because it wasn't. It was completely readable. It told a story, but it was very predictable, and I just didn't think it was bringing anything new to the table. It felt like every character and everything that happened was something that I read before. So yeah, I gave this a 2 overall. I only read the first book. I'm not going to be carrying it on. So that was a miss for me, unfortunately. I then read 2 more manga, which I'm working through the Higurashi series, which is a Japanese horror series, like a mystery horror kind of thing. It's kind of famous for, it's a visual novel originally, but it's famous for sort of having like this long arc called the question arc, which is like presenting a lot of mysteries and you don't really understand what's happening, and then it has a long answer arc which reveals the truth behind the matter. It's basically about this village called Hanamizawa, and messed up things happen. It's a lot to do with religion and insanity, and it's very psychological, essentially. I really love this series, and I'm slowly working my way through it. I finished all of the question arc now, and I've been picking up some of the spin-offs before I start the answer arc, and I picked up this 2-volume spin-off, which is called, let me just check the pronunciation for it, Higurashi no Nakakoro ni Onisarashi-hen arc, which is 2 volumes, and it is translated to the Demon Exposing arc. And I found this to be really interesting because this was not set in Hanamizawa. This is actually set in a different town altogether, but it is set at the same time as specific events are happening within Hanamizawa. And our main character is a young girl who seems completely ordinary. She's like living like a nice little happy school life. She's got friends, there's a boy that she likes, but she's living with her family, and with her mother and her father and her grandma grew up in Hanamizawa. So she is from Hanamizawa. I don't believe she's ever actually been herself. But her grandma is kind of not happy that they left this village. She still kind of worships Yashiro-sama, who is like the god that they believe in, practices rituals around it, and encourages her granddaughter to also sort of practice in it, even though it seems like she doesn't really believe it that much. Her parents are just kind of a bit long-suffering about it all. Things happen at the village that I'm not going to go into because this is kind of spoilers for the whole series. But basically some things happen, and there is a series of deaths. The main girl's family are kind of suspected of this because they come from Hanamizawa. It's really interesting sort of look at community and how people react to you because of your heritage. And it had some good twists and turns, some stuff I was not expecting, so I really enjoyed this one actually. The art is just kind of so-so, but it does really fit the style of what it's trying to do. And for a side arc where there's like, I think 2 characters show up who are from the original Higurashi series, and otherwise it's a completely new cast, I really enjoyed it. It had some good twists, it had some good turns, it had some good horror, and I liked the characters. So yeah, I gave it a 4 overall, and I'm looking forward to starting the answer arcs next. The next book I read was an arc, and it is The Poisons We Drink by Bethany Baptiste. And I was really excited that I got accepted to request this because this sounded like it was exactly up my alley. It's a YA paranormal fantasy, so it's kind of set in one of those like alternate timelines where it's like modern day America, I think. And but witches are real, and it's not like a civil war, but there is definite discord brewing between humans and witches, as they're called in this book. And the plot in the story is kind of culminating towards this registration act where witches are going to have to name themselves essentially so that everyone knows who they are. And the political commentary, the social commentary is really good in this book. You can kind of see where it's going from, just the whole we have to register ourselves. And basically our main character Venus is a witch who can craft love potions. And love potions in this book, they're really interesting. It's not just a case of making someone fall in love with another. It's a whole spectrum of love. It's about fixing ties between families that have been broken. It's about making people love ideas of things, making people more susceptible to things, that kind of thing. So it was really interesting how it was taken, and I really love the whole like the magic world building in it. Like this whole thing where she has like a thing that's gone on with herself that makes it more difficult for her to exist in her life, and she has to kind of like have this vow of abnegation where she doesn't actually perform magic very often except when she's doing the potions, otherwise bad things can happen. So there was a lot of really interesting things to do with that. There was a lot of sort of like traditional Wiccan practices that were involved in it, such as herbs, that kind of thing. Like she brewed her potions in a cauldron, which I love. Familiar as well, who was a cat who'd been with the family for like over 1,000 years or something as well, who I loved. That was such a great concept, as well as just some of the things in general to do with familiars in this book were really good. But one of the things I really liked about the magic system was the kind of cause and effect of it all. So essentially, like, you can craft this magic, and you can craft magic into like a certain like stages of how magic gets more powerful but more dangerous, and it becomes dangerous to the person creating the potion, and it creates a blowback essentially. So you make this potion, but in doing so it like sends out the energy, and it also sends it at you in a damaging way. So there was some like real body horror elements in this as well, which I wasn't expecting. There was more as well of another character who kind of like can shapeshift, but they struggle with their shapeshifting. But yeah, I really enjoyed this story a lot. Essentially, I didn't even tell you the premise of the story, I realised. Basically, the premise is that Venus Stoneheart, her mother, who's kind of the person who's been like directing the potion making business for a while for her, is murdered, and she is trying to track down who the killer is, and get justice for her mother. But there's a bigger conspiracy going on that she gets involved in, and it also affects her sister, who she's trying to protect. Her other family sort of get involved in it as well, and that is honestly one of the things I also really loved about this book. There was a romance that did go through it, but it did not take over the whole plot. Also, kudos to the author for doing some great bisexual and non-binary representation in this book. I really appreciated how they did it and how naturally it just went with the story of the book without it like taking over the storyline. A lot of this book is to do with community, it's to do with family ties, and being able to admit when things are too much of a burden and you have to rely on others to help you. Had some really good messages. I just overall had a really good time with this. So the writing was good. There was some really fun heist elements as well, which I was not expecting from this. But there's a whole thing where she's having to like get these specific ingredients to make her potions, and it involves like her and her cousin basically having to like do some silly things together, which was really fun. I think the main antagonist for me just wasn't massively well developed enough, unfortunately. So when there was like a big reveal, I was just kind of a bit like about it, unfortunately. But otherwise, really enjoyed this. The book has been published now, I believe. I think it came out on March the 5th. So it is out there now if you want to get your own copy, and I do recommend it. I had a great time with it. I would really like to see if the author does more with this world, with these characters, with this story, because I think there's so much more that could be told with it, honestly. This is a debut book by Bethany Baptiste. I think they worked on a graphic novel before, but this is like their debut, like, adult novel essentially. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Really recommend checking it out if you're interested in that kind of paranormal fantasy with a surprising amount of social commentary in there and some great characters. It is classed as a YA, but honestly, it could pass for adult. So the final book I read this month, I thought I'd leave the best till last, and it is my 5-star book, Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. Really, really loved this one. I kind of went in this with high expectations just because the premise sounds so good. You know, this is essentially a gay murder mystery, a gay fantasy murder mystery, should I say, set on a cruise. This land has a whole bunch of different regions, and all of like leaders of the regions have these special powers. And our main character, Ganymedes, is from the Fish Kingdom, and he doesn't actually have any powers. He's kind of just faking it. He is, like, not keen about going on this cruise, you know, spending, like, 12 days with a bunch of rich, privileged nobles, essentially, who look down on him. He's not keen about the whole thing, rightfully so. And, of course, things start to get worse when, on the very first day of them being on the ship, a murder happens. And Ganymedes works together with 2 other people to essentially be a detective and try and work out who the killer is, what their motives are, and stop more deaths from happening. And I really enjoyed this. This is a debut book by Frances White, and her writing style is so easy to get into. The emotional beats in this story actually really hit me so hard. I'm not really a big fan of murder mysteries normally, but I do like sort of more fantasy-based murder mysteries, so I enjoyed Gideon the Ninth. I enjoy sort of books like Anita Blake, where we've kind of got like paranormal mysteries going on, and it's that kind of thing where you are like the detective, almost like going through this fantasy world trying to work out what's going on. And this just had all the best elements of these kind of things, really. Like, I feel like, you know, it would work for someone that likes murder mysteries but maybe isn't as into fantasy, and vice versa. Honestly, I feel like it's a good starting point for someone who's wanting to sort of get into either of those genres. But yeah, really, really enjoyed this one. I'm so happy I got a chance to read it. I'm so happy I've got two versions of this one. This is actually the Waterstones special edition, but I also have the Illumicrate edition somewhere up there, and I do not regret having two copies of this. I don't know what more I can say, because the thing is, with this being a murder mystery, I don't want to give away spoilers. But I will say that I really loved the cast of characters in this. I don't think there was a miss, quite honestly. Like, I'm a fan of these kind of zany big cast of characters stuff, so I think even one of the inspirations that Frances herself has said that she was kind of influenced by when reading this book was like series such as Danganronpa, which are a bunch of crazy characters who get involved in a murder mystery. This definitely gave me these vibes, but I think there was a lot of development with all of the characters that I wasn't expecting. So even though like certain characters were maybe only around for a couple of chapters, I really felt we got some like good emotional story beats with them, so that if something happened to them, we felt something. Like, I think there was only one character that I was kind of a bit like not keen, not crazy on, and they died, and I was just kind of like, oh, okay. But yeah, I really enjoyed how the author managed to like dangle all these different characters and develop them just enough so that we, following Ganymedes, could kind of feel something every time something happened. So we actually read this for my book club, and everyone genuinely really liked this, which was really nice to see also that it wasn't just me that liked this. A lot of people had a good time with it. I think there was like a couple of the romance elements I think didn't really quite work for me, mainly because of a certain reveal, that like a certain twist essentially that happens later on, that it kind of killed the romance for me a little bit, but I was really enjoying it up until that point. But that is really the only complaint I think I have to say. It kept me guessing. I was able to guess enough so that I felt clever, at least, which is always nice when you're reading a murder mystery and you can predict a certain amount of what has happened in the mystery, but not everything. And I like that there was enough that I couldn't predict that was a surprise. So yeah, really enjoyed it. Ganymedes was such a great protagonist character. I would happily read so many books to do with him. Him and this is a little girl called Grasshopper in it, who is like the most adorable thing ever. Also, there are like mini dragons who are fluffy and have bow ties, who are like the waiters around the ship, and I love them. They're so good. So yeah, honestly, if you've been hesitating to check this out, I would highly recommend it. I absolutely loved it. I think I've only had like 1 over 5 star this year, and I'm happy this is one of them, honestly, because I had such high expectations for this. But yeah, I loved it. I'm so excited to read basically anything else that Frances White puts out. So that is my... It is not my wrap up, because I need to talk about my bingo board. So I did manage to make some progress on my bingo board from hell. So I'm going to bring up what it was last month, and we will have a look together to see what I've managed to tick off further, and if I've actually managed to complete any goals. I don't think I've completed any goals yet, but I've definitely made progress. Here is what it was from last month. Not great, but I've definitely made some progress on this. So let's go through it one by one, and we'll see if I've managed to complete any of them. A manga series. Yes. I realised I put this on here. I haven't actually said exactly what it is. I've written this completely wrong, but it is complete. I think it's 5 or 10 manga series. I think I was saying 5 manga series, but I did manage to finish a manga series, almost by chance, because I wasn't originally going to read this month, but I never finished this, and I finally did. So it may only be 3 volumes, but it counts. So we have a tick in finishing manga series. Read 50% of my 2024 purchases. Did make some progress on this. Some of my purchases were specifically for the FairyTale vlog that I was doing, so I read them. I'm not at the 50% yet, but I am currently sitting at around 17% read, so we're getting there. I've definitely got plans to read a bunch of these in the near future for projects, so we will be making progress on that soon. Read 12 TBR veterans. Yes, I did read this. Not the whole thing, but it's enough, and I'm counting it, so we have a tick in that one as well, bringing that up to 2. Read 10 horror or thriller books. Not yet. I'm not counting manga horror, just because I want this to be specifically novels for this square, so I'm not counting that one for that one. Didn't do any random emoji reads. I did read some sequels this month. We're not counting Assassin's Apprentice because it isn't technically a sequel, but I did read 2 sequels with this series because I read Volume 2 and Volume 3, and I read the Higurashi manga as well. So that brings us up to a total of 5. So we are halfway through that challenge. I read 10 sci-fi books. Didn't read any sci-fi this month, but I am reading sci-fi in March. So I will finally have some progress on that one then. BFF controls my TBR. Not done that yet. And read 10 rainy day books. So I previously read Prayer of the Orange Tree, and I managed to get another rainy day book off because School for Good and Evil was most definitely a rainy day book. I was just looking for the best excuse to read it, and I kept putting it off and putting it off. Please, I finally read it, even though I'm sad it's not a series I'll be continuing. So that is the new stats for the bingo board. I'm hoping to make some good chunks on this in next month, so hopefully there'll be a little bit more to show for it. But that is it for this wrap up. Thank you for staying through to the end, and until next time, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!